Welcome to Nerd Out at Spotify, where we bring you behind the curtain of the world's most popular audio streaming subscription service. Machine learning, open source, clouds, tabs versus spaces. We'll talk to Spotify engineers about interesting tech issues, big and small. I'm Dave Zolotuski, principal engineer at Spotify. We're doing something a little different, a special 3-part miniseries all about product and experimentation. Across these episodes, we're digging into how experimentation actually works in practice. Not just running tests, but how teams make decisions, build culture, and turn data into better product experiences. You'll hear from leaders across the industry, each bringing a different perspective on what it takes to experiment at scale in different kinds of organizations. Guiding the conversation are two of Spotify's finest experimentation nerds, Luke Frake, a product manager on our subscriptions team whose career has revolved around experimentation for the past decade, and Mårten Schultzberry, a staff data scientist with a research background in statistics who spent the last 6 years working on Spotify's experimentation platform, Confidence, which is now available for any company to try at confidence.spotify.com. Together, they explore everything from metrics and methodology to velocity, trust, and how teams learn. If you care about building better products, making smarter decisions, or just want to understand how modern product development really works, this series is for you. Today, Luke and Mårten will be talking to Bhav Patel, data director at Huel, a fast-growing food and nutrition brand with a direct-to-consumer model, a global omnichannel presence, and a data-first culture baked in from day one. All right, let's get into it.
Hello and welcome to this experimentation mini-series. We're really excited to nerd out with you on all things experimentation, and we've got some of the best in the business to talk with. I'm Mårten Schultzberg, and I'm joined here by my dear colleague Luke. How are you, buddy?
I'm good, thank you, mate. Yeah, very good. And I think the main reason I'm feeling good today is because we are going to talk to the wonderful Bhav. Super excited to have you here, Bhav. You always have a clear head for experimentation and a practical take on anything to do with kind of measurement in this area as well. Bhav is the data director at Huel, working on the intersection of product growth and analytics in a business where data has to connect digital experiences, marketing, and the realities of a physical product. What I value about Bhav is that he's not just doing work from inside a fast-growing company, he's also giving back to the wider community. He's a founder of Crap Talks, a London meetup series built around honest stories from the trenches. And he's also behind Keynote and Causal, both aimed at helping teams turn evidence into decisions, not just dashboards. And for anyone that hasn't come across Huel before, it's a UK-founded food and nutrition brand best known for convenient meal products with a strong direct-to-consumer model and a rapidly growing e-commerce engine. So with all that being said, Bhav, thank you so much for coming to talk to us today.
Thanks for having me, guys. I'm excited to be here.
Just to kick us off here, for someone listening who has never set foot inside Huel and Huel's organization, can you speak a little bit about how experimentation looks at Huel, day to day? Who is involved? What kind of experiments are you running? Can you just take us into your world, please?
Yeah, so we actually restarted our experimentation journey back into October, November time. The company was running experiments initially when they launched, and they have been for many years, but then changes in platform and technology and team changes meant that we have reset our experimentation program. So we kicked it off again. I want to say November is officially when we launched. So we're only 5 months in, but we're scaling it really nicely. January, which was our peak, we just launched 10 experiments, which I know it's not about the number of experiments you launch, but I think it's always a good sign that within a few months, you're already running 10 experiments in that month. In terms of who does it, we actually subscribe to the model where an experiment can come from anywhere. It's not isolated to one person or a small team of CRO specialists. So an experiment idea can come from our trading team who run most of our experiments because we are predominantly a D2C website. D2C means direct to consumer. So, Spotify is a good example. You are technically a direct consumer brand. And the opposite would be like a B2B, a business to business. So D2C means that we sell directly to the consumers in various formats. So our trading team will come up with experiment ideas. Our marketing team will launch experiments on landing pages. They even let me run an experiment, which was wild. I couldn't believe they let me run an experiment, but it basically comes from everywhere. And then when we have this very joint ownership and joint outcome-based approach where we're all super excited and interested in seeing the outcome of the results. So it's not just, the onus isn't just on one person. It is very much a group mentality approach.
Nice. When you say you said you've restarted your experimentation program in this way as well, and now you're in this democratization of experimentation, basically bring it to everyone. How do you balance that, making sure that the best practices are followed, that everybody is doing things the way that you've probably seen it done previously, and how do you make sure that stays consistent as people are scaling up?
I think it's about the education, if I'm being completely honest. I'm trying not to ring fence it too much. I think there is that fine balance between allowing it to scale organically and allowing people to make mistakes whilst ensuring best practices are brought in at the right time. So if it's an experiment which has higher risk associated with it, so something we're testing in the checkout or the subscriptions part of the site, we're going to take a lot more of a rigorous approach to that than when it's something that's a bit more, I don't want to say lighthearted, but the risk element is significantly lower. And then of course, when we're testing in smaller markets, we don't need to be as rigorous because we kind of want to scale rapidly our experiments in those areas as well. So it's a balancing act as far as I'm concerned, scaling organically, but also ensuring there is rigor around the process and educating people piece by piece rather than kind of like throwing a statistics book in their face.
That makes sense. But can you take me through that? Because I think it's really interesting. You say here that an experiment can come from anyone and the whole idea of democratizing that methodology and that way of working. But how does it work? So say that I come from a maybe atypical, not the growth team or something like that, and I come up with this idea, how would that be realized? From implementation to what metrics should we use? How does that machinery work? What kinds of people are involved? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so let's say you're a marketing person. Chances are your knowledge on the metrics you're concerned with, you'll already have an idea of the metrics you're trying to move, and your experiments will be designed to help you meet and grow the metrics that you're targeted with. So from a selection metrics perspective, it's not like we're saying, we want to run this test, now let's figure out the metrics. The idea is that we know the metrics we want to move, and then the tests are designed based around those metrics. Then we'll kind of start generating hypotheses around, well, what is it that we think we're trying to do? So for example, if we're running an experiment where we want to try and increase AOV without harming conversion, we'll design an experiment where we give customers different choices in products, or we'll allow them to add things in an upsell point, an add-on point. So it's kind of like chicken and egg. I think most people know roughly what metrics they want to move. It's really just about finding what we think the pain points are and then thinking about how we can come about ideating ways to drive that metric forward.
And it sounds quite impressive that people are so metric aware. I'm not sure if that's true for all organizations that I've been encountered lately. I think that having that clarity on these are the things that I'm trying to improve, that sounds like a pretty advanced degree of matureness in terms of data thinking.
Yeah, I think this largely speaks volumes about the culture. Huel is very much a data-driven organization. I look after the data team and we track usage of our data, and we do that by monthly active users on our BI platform. And for an organization that's about 300 people, including people that work in our warehouse operations, we have 60% of the hooligans looking at data on a monthly basis. And this is going back 3, 4, 5 years, this kind of data culture. So it's very much at the heart of it. So actually experimentation, if anything, it's just another way to drive that data forward and move those metrics.
How do you instill something like that in a company? I mean, obviously, you've worked at many different places in the past, and I'm sure you've seen companies that are data-driven in this way, but you hooligans sound like you've got it in a real special way. Where does that come from? How does that happen? Is it organic? Is it top-down? Is it from you explaining everything to everyone in a great way? How does this come about?
I mean, I wish I could take credit. This kind of cultural mentality has existed way before I joined, but I have been looking deeply at what's driven. And I think a big part of it is the fact that the founder is very data first and he's very evidence based in terms can we validate what we're doing? So that kind of drives from the top down, but then from the bottom up as well, we've very much removed all of the fences and the hurdles that people might have to jump over to be able to get access to the data. So the availability and accessibility of that data is very much put into the hands of all hooligans. If you were to join, say, next week, one of your first sessions would very much be a induction to data at Huel with someone in my team, where we'll walk you through the platforms, how to access it, how to basically get the data you need. Then you'll immediately begin that access to the platform. Then you'll be enrolled in a beginner's training program for data. And then once you've completed that, we'll move you kind of into the intermediate and advanced. So it's very much culturally right there at the heart of things.
Amazing. So you get this, not just an onboarding into the company, but an onboarding into the data and metrics at this point as well.
That resonates a lot with me. I've seen that successfully also at Spotify, the having it as part of the onboarding. So it's just day one. That resonates a lot.
And one of the things which I also think is really interesting with Huel as well is you are this omnichannel company. You're a modern company, but you still have this omnichannel bricks and mortar problem to solve, as well as kind of the digital B2C that you're dealing with as well. How does that affect everything you do? You mentioned your warehouse folks are focusing on data as well. How does this permeate through this? And what problems does this bring for you and your team as well?
So we started off as a D2C company, so largely selling on Huel.com. And then over the years, we've added supermarkets and we've added Amazon, and now you can buy on TikTok Shop. There are data sets that the warehouse team will look at. They probably don't care too much about the experiments that we're running, but they want to know stock availability. They want to know complaints per 1,000 users. They'll look at where we're likely to run out of stock. So there is a natural data mindset within that team as well, because they need to plan operations around that to reduce waste, to ensure that we've got the stock we needed, we don't go out of stock, and our planning and forecasting is right there. So on the more omni-channel bricks and mortar side of things, I think where the challenge then becomes is when you're doing marketing, for example, you want to run an experiment on ad copy on landing pages, but customers don't necessarily have to buy from your website. They can just walk into a supermarket and buy, or they can then go onto Amazon and buy from there. Or if they see an ad on TikTok, they can directly buy from TikTok as well. So it becomes an econometric challenge, is how do you ensure that the tests you're running, your marketing spend, everything that you're doing is encapsulated and captured within all of those things you're trying out. Spotify is a good example. Most of the stuff you guys will be doing will be based on digital metrics, right? Like cost per acquisition, lifetime value, engagement rates, adoption rates, listen rates, whatever it might be. They're very much in platform metrics. When you start thinking about econometrics, you're kind of trying to model out behavior and buying patterns in areas where you don't have that immediate feedback loop of someone's done something and you automatically get a ping into your sort of like data warehouse that this has happened. Econometrics is where you kind of start thinking like a Coca-Cola. So that mindset around, you're spending all of this ad revenue and you're doing all of this marketing activity, but people can go into Tesco and buy it, but it's not going to be directly linked to that one Facebook ad.
Econometrics is I think becoming more and more of a natural part for a lot of companies that are serious about evaluation, like product or content or whatever it might be. But it also comes with a lot of complexity. I think in my head, the story here was that people were very excited when they realized we can run randomized experiments on online products, because we can just randomize treatments and then we can observe them and we have instrumentation and all of that, just like you just talked about. But then we come into this econometric space and we need to start thinking about all of these mechanisms. It's a big leap in terms of skills that a team need to have. And so how are you working with that, and how are you making sure that people are not sort of getting lost in the literature and all of the pitfalls that comes with?
Yeah, so I think from a adoption perspective, so when you publish a piece of analysis that is quote unquote a piece of econometric modeling, the way that we do it is that we kind of simplify the language and just make it really accessible for the end user to be able to just say, hey, look, we did this thing, this was the outcome. Don't worry about what's in the black box. And I think there is a level of trust built between the data team and the rest of the organization to just appreciate that what we're doing is right. It's done by the books. If we've made any compromises, that we've considered the risks of those compromises. So that's the kind of outward facing way. It's like, how do you bring something as complex as that to everyone in a way that they can understand? And then internally, the data team is made up of 3 data engineers, 3 analysts, and myself. And we try to work as a team instead of a single unit. So when we've done a piece of work, we'll bounce ideas off each other. Have you considered this? Have you considered this? We'll obviously use some AI in this modern age to help sort of like fast track code writing. Because we are a really lean team, we have to be like super rapid about this. All of the work we then do is peer reviewed by someone else within the team. So there is that kind of like, you're not marking your own homework. There's someone else sense checking it, making sure, we haven't gone overly complex, it's understood, and other viewpoints have been considered.
So you mentioned before, this niceness about that any team can come with an experimentation idea. Does that apply also here? But then you as a sort of center of excellence team helps out with that? Or like, how does that work on that front? I think it's super interesting with this parallel, because it's like both are, just methods of evaluation, but some comes with some more challenges. I find that it's hard to platformize, it's hard to educate and all of those things.
Yeah, so it's absolutely that. Someone will come up with something they want to do, but they're not quite sure how to measure it. Let's say, for example, you wanted to run a TV campaign, or they want to do some YouTube activity. We'll help them by either doing something like creating a synthetic control group. So I think I'll explain that. In an A/B test, you have your natural control and variant group. You split the traffic 50-50. When you're doing, say, for example, a reach test, which is around going out and driving awareness, you can do it in multiple ways. One of them being sort of like using a synthetic control. So let's say you wanted to do a reach test in the UK, you don't have a variant UK, as much as we would love to be able to create a variant UK. So what we'll do in this case is we'll take other markets and we'll look at their performance and we'll run it through an algorithm and create a market that looks like UK based out of the European markets, for example. And so that might be taking 0.2% of Germany, 0.4% of Sweden, 0. Blah, 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 whatever. And then you map those trend lines on top of each other and they'll sit almost identically on top of each other. Then you do your activity and then you try to see if your real UK diverges from your synthetic UK.
So to say it back then, basically, if you're trying to take something which doesn't have a clear counterfactual, you're effectively then formulating the closest possible approximation of that item. So in this case, you're taking the UK, you're going to run your TV ad, you'll take a bunch of comparisons, and then you'll just be able to say, before this period, this is how they performed, and they were about similar. Then we see the event, which is campaign goes live, and it runs for, say, 2 weeks, and then after that, it ends. And you'll be able to see, okay, in our counterfactual, nothing happens ideally. And what we can see in the UK is that it goes up and we have more conversions, we have more users purchasing, campaign ends, comes a bit further down. And so is that a way to think about it?
Yeah, exactly. And it's obviously complex. Everyone kind of agrees that the gold standard for doing causal inference analysis is an A/B test, right? That is the best method possible, where you've got a reliably split set of traffic or users, or whatever you want to call them, and you split that in real time. So any external factors are also controlled for. But yeah, effectively, that's how we do it, where we need to create a counterfactual synthetic market. Other times it might be like a geo-lift test, where we split the country in two and find different regions that match with each other. And then we run something on half those regions, and then we use the other regions as a control group. So that's another example. Or you can do a difference in difference analysis, where if you find that, say, for example, Germany and Sweden generally have the same trends, you can look to see if there's a difference when you've introduced some variable. And that's called a difference in difference analysis. So this is the fantastic part about working at a brand or a product like Huel, is that you have to overcome sort of these limitations and challenges of the bricks and mortar side of things across countries and regions. But also, when you can, you bring it right down to a classical A/B test.
One aspect there that I think is interesting, what you mentioned before about these online tests and you have this direct signal, one thing that I know a lot of companies are spending a lot of time on thinking about, including Spotify, is when to measure things. We introduce this change at this point and then we measure X amount of time after this user saw it and stuff like that. And I can imagine with these tests, you have very different horizons. Can you what's the runtime of something like a synthetic control or a geo-lift type study? And what are the time horizons on which you measure things?
It will vary depending on the metric we're trying to monitor. So for example, something like LTV requires a much longer horizon to be able to measure against. Whereas if you're looking at sort of an immediate impact of something on your website, you can run it still like a classical A/B test, do your sample size analysis or do your power analysis and say that, we're going to run this for 4 weeks with a minimum detectable effect, MDE, that we're looking for of 5% or something like that. So it's a difficult question to answer because there are so many. With the more non-classical A/B tests, we actually need to run for a little bit longer, or we'll have a lot more noise, which means that we have to do a lot of data cleaning after. So the experiment's finished, then we have to go and clean the data a little bit to try to account for variance and reduce that variance. But in other cases where it's just like an A/B test, we'll do probably what everyone else does, which is just we'll run it through a power analysis calculator and determine runtimes based on baseline conversion rates or AOV or whatever, and then expected uplift that we're looking for.
Nice. I think that takes me into something that you were talking about this earlier, and you mentioned around kind of different channels that you're dealing with as well, around Amazon and other such areas like this. How do you handle looking at that from a cannibalization point of view? And how do you see kind of the different plays, and how do you measure for the different plays between, say, a channel like Amazon versus your direct website, or for something else is having an impact? And when you can only look at this from a directional basis, how do you understand what is good enough to be able to act on? How do you get to that point, and how do you feel comfortable that the business has reached that point?
I think with a lot of these kind of things, there is a part gut feel call to it, which is just, we need to do it, right? If your audience is on Amazon or they're on TikTok, yes, there will be some cannibalization that's to be expected, but you just kind of have to be there. Where the challenge becomes, how do you then measure the impact of that, right? So the decision to be there is a bit of a no-brainer. We have to be there. If we're not there, someone else will be there. That part is fairly straightforward. From the measurement perspective, I think this is where it becomes a little bit art and science mixed together. So from the various different platforms you can buy from, there is very limited data available to you about their users, because they're protecting their ecosystem. So even though you might be shopping on TikTok or you might be shopping on Amazon, Amazon will provide you with things like the order IDs and, where you're shipping to or postcodes and things like that. But they won't tell you the user's email address or they won't tell you their name. So there's very limited information. So you have to do a lot of stitching of data and then building sort of like probabilistic models that try to assume what the crossover is like. And of course, when you're just launching in these platforms, there is a natural migration between platforms that happens. So if imagine like, let's say, for example, if Spotify suddenly started selling t-shirts, right? For the first couple of years, you're selling just on Spotify.com. You validate the business model. Then you decide, actually, it's worth us putting on Amazon. You're going to see a natural base of users who then shift to Amazon who were originally buying from Spotify.com. And then you get the people who found the t-shirt on Amazon. You've driven some brand awareness who then come to your website. And you kind of have to stitch that together to find things like first purchase time across the platforms and then make inferences around whether they were a truly new customer on Amazon or on Spotify, and then how they got about moving across and when they moved across. And then you'll have this natural migration of people. And then you'll hopefully come to a stabilization point where the people who want to buy from Amazon directly buy from Amazon, the people who want to buy from Spotify will directly buy from Spotify, and occasionally there might be some crossovers.
You were talking previously about your sort of restarting experimentation. How do you, in your role, define the success of that? Is it volume of experiments or velocity or decision quality, win rate? What does a healthy growth look like in terms of scaling experimentation, you think?
When I think about the success of experimentation, I don't think of it in terms of experiments launched or win rates or velocity or anything like that. I just look at it as a binary. Are we running experiments? Yes or no? And if the answer is yes, then great. Because I think it was Microsoft who ran 1,000 experiments or something like that per month. Or they were launching like experiments left, right, and center. And I think suddenly within the industry, the number of experiments you were launching became this gold star to aspire towards, this North Star. We want to try and get to 100 experiments, 200 experiments, whatever it might be. And I think very pragmatically, I don't really think brands like Huel are ever going to get there. If we can maintain sort of like 10 to 12 experiments per month, that'd be fantastic. That for me would be a win. And the second thing is, I guess, the diversity of where the experiments are coming from. So again, it's not a metric that I would particularly say, hey, you guys, Huel, we need to start measuring this. I consider this very much if there are different teams running experiments or coming up with ideas, that I think in itself is a win. Because on top of running experiments, everyone else at Huel has another job, right? They're a trading manager, they're a marketing manager, they're a data analyst. So no one's bound by the pressures of we need to get more experiments out the door. You're bound by the fact that actually we have a problem. Can an experiment solve this? If the answer is yes, then that's the right approach. If the answer is no, and we need to do something else, then they have the tools in their toolkit and the ownership to be able to try something different. It's not every problem is a nail and the only tool we have is a hammer type situation.
I think you've summarized something which I've always found such a dichotomy in the experimentation industry, where I feel like there is this constant goal of more experiments over and over again. And I do think it is more of a case of this quality versus velocity debate that's, we see numbers like that for Microsoft. Spotify is often quoted there as well, and Booking.com and Netflix and all these companies. And something which I always just feel is missed, and I don't know why, is it's also, there's an employee per experiment piece going on here as well. Microsoft has tens of thousands of employees globally, versus you said you have 7 people in the data team at Huel. So it's this comparison, I feel like it gets overlooked every time I hear people quoting about these numbers.
I actually saw someone at LinkedIn had done that, tried to do that math, tried to look at public numbers of number of employees in R&D and stuff like that, look at like the experiment per like R&D employee or something like that.
Well, it's interesting because R&D is a really good way to think about it, because experimentation is effectively R&D, right? But R&D comes in many formats. Like Microsoft, for example, they don't have a team of nutritional specialists who are doing R&D in building sort of like these awesome food products that are nutritionally complete that you can just grab on the go. R&D and research happens in that space, right? So by comparison to Microsoft, we're doing a lot more food-related experiments, if you will, than Microsoft will ever do. But I think it's a good point. And Luke, actually, I want to touch on something you said. You said quantity over quality. I would go one step further than quality. I would go relevancy, right? As I said, you can run high-quality experiments, right? But if you're bound by the number of experiments or the velocity of experiments you run, then at some point you have to compromise relevancy. I used to work at Gusto, and this is not throwing shade on anyone who purely specializes in CRO, is that sometimes CRO and experimentation folks have the knowledge to conduct the experiment, but they don't have the contextual experience to make the experiment relevant to the problem. So, and I'll give you a perfect example. When I used to work at Gusto, we ran an experiment on our picking line. So Gusto is a food business where it's a meal box subscription, and you would go in and, on the website or the app, and you'd order your meals for the week. There'd be like 5 recipes, spaghetti bolognese, like burgers, chicken, whatever it might be. We wanted to try to improve the throughput of our picking line within the factory. So our data scientists wrote the routing algorithm, which sends the box from one station to another. The warehouse team, they had the metrics that they wanted to target, and then I helped them design the experiment. So we had to account for when people were off sick, how many hours in the day they were. And we didn't use a classic A/B test. We used a quasi-experiment design. So for a short period, we monitored the old routing algorithm. Then we launched the new routing algorithm, and then we went back and reverted, and we did a kind of like pre-post-pre analysis. And that type of experiment, my knowledge on a warehouse is like squat diddly, right? I don't know anything about warehouse operations, and I couldn't write a routing algorithm for you. So in this instance, we combined 3 different specialist areas to create a highly relevant experiment. I think that hands down like my all-time favorite experiment ever. Like if someone ever writes like a biography about me, or if I ever write an autobiography, there'll be a section called favorite experiment. That'll be the one that goes into that.
Bringing teams together in this way, I think, is the catalyst to be able to get these amazing things coming together. And I think what you've just shown then is taking robotics, machinery, you're taking algorithms about delivery, you're taking human pieces, and you're also taking your data specialist and pulling that together to something that then brings massive value to the company as well, which is, I think that is the ultimate magic when you get these things. I want to touch on something you said earlier as well. You said about how you're using AI to be able to increase what your team are able to do and capable to do. Obviously, there's a lot of conversation at the minute around AI and how it's being used. I'd love to know some practical takeaways basically from you. Where do you think that teams should be looking to leverage and build upon using AI? And also, if there's any way you think that AI is just not ready to come into that point of view yet and should be kind of kept out of that area, what's your thoughts?
I think fast-tracking experiment design is a no-brainer. Rather than doing the manual grafting required in a pre-experiment design, you can fast-track many elements of an experiment. So you could plot your baselines, you can determine your sample size requirements. So you can do all of those kind of things right off the bat. All you need to do is like feed AI the data and then just let it come up with the best approach for doing this. So I think pre-experiment is a good use case for AI. And by virtue, I guess, if you're considering pre-experiment, then post-experiment also becomes a rapid use case for AI adoption. If you're already not using AI to do your pre-experiment analysis, post-experiment analysis, you're probably not being as efficient as you could be. Again, no shade on anyone who still is doing it the old-fashioned way. I sometimes like doing it the old-fashioned way and, getting a feel for the numbers between my fingertips. But then I think where it really starts to add value and transcend beyond efficiency is creativity of an experiment. Let's say, for example, you're bound by the shackles of some limitations of the problem you're trying to solve. In the use case of Huel, I talked about the fact that we can't always run an A/B test. So I think where AI becomes useful is that it can come up with rapid alternatives that you can then kind of go and explore further. So let's do a practical example. Let's say, for example, you want to run some ads on Meta and you want to do an A/B test and you want to run an uplift test. Now, okay, you can A/B test the landing page in the classical sense, but let's say you want to test some different copy or something like that, or you want to test regional differences. The AI can help you come up rapidly with an experiment that will help you design the test, quote unquote test, right? But this is where you'll need the human element. And I'll do a real example of this. I was working with, I don't know why, I randomly decided to use Google's AI on this one particular sunny winter afternoon. I was sat there and I was like, okay, I want to run this test. And I knew I wanted to use Meta's MMM package called Robin. Robin is a marketing media mix algorithm that allows you to test the differences between locations. So I asked Google, just said, hey, look, here's my data. Can you just go and design the test for me? And they gave me the output and said, blah, 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 blah. And then I looked at the data and it looked suspicious to me. And I asked it, like, did you use the Robin package? And it said, no, it wasn't able to install the Python package or the R package, I forget, needed to run that thing. So what it came up with was absolute garbage. So then I went to OpenAI and I tried it there and I said, and I specifically stated, use Robin, because I couldn't be bothered to sit there and write the R code out for this, right? It did it rapidly for me. And I think this is a really good use case of using AI to supercharge your experimentation program or your causal inferencing program. You need to have that fundamental underlying knowledge to know when something doesn't feel quite right. So something I want to explore, I haven't started exploring it yet, is I want to start exploring the use of AI for synthetic users. And specifically here, let's say, for example, you come up with an A/B test idea, right? It goes through all the design processes. And before you put it out to sort of like general public, right, from an A/B test perspective, I'd love to be able to do synthetic users to be able to like run through and spot problems with the UX, the design, encapsulating best practices and psychological effects. But if you can do like a first pass, for me, it's a way of reducing risk. You want all your experiments to succeed. And even if the synthetic control group doesn't come up with statistical differences, it might at least be able to point out some things that you might have completely missed or that were glaringly obvious to the AI, but not to you. And then you can iterate that quickly and then put out a test that's hopefully been through a bit more rigor than a designer's designed it. Someone in marketing has sense checked it, but no one's taken into consideration like psychological effects. I forget what some of these ones are. Like there is expected behavior bias where, what you've learned on other platforms, you've been conditioned by the sum of all the other experiences. So when you come to your website, there is a baseline expectation. If that baseline expectation isn't met, then you would expect the AI model to be able to say, look, you've diverged here from accepted dogma, which is okay, but you're mindful of it going into it. And if it's an accidental miss on your design, then you can correct that. But if it's not, then you can say, yeah, that's fine. We know we're trying something new.
I think that the thing I hear a lot about with synthetic users is that people are concerned about the validity of them. But I also, at the same time, it's a new step that we can add in. I mean, we're moving from a world. Previously, I think most companies were limited by the number of users that came through their website anyway. And so, you were limited by the number of variants or the number of experiments that you could run. We're now moving into a world where, the analysis can be sped up using ML. I'm using Claude all the time to be making new experiences as well. You have the ability to basically speed up almost every single step of the way. And for me, synthetic users is going to be a great kind of almost like a pre-test validation step you can run where you could say, okay, I have 50 variants and I'm going to use synthetic users to help me narrow these down a little bit further. So for me, I see it more aligned with user research, that it does give you this kind of directional steer as well.
So Bhav, you've been running the CRAP talks, conversation rate, analytics, and product talks in London for years now. So can you talk a little bit about what CRAP talks are really about and what you've taken out of running those over the years?
I remember I went to this event this one time, but it was a 5-day event, and the middle day was dedicated to a data track. The first talk was a panel discussion, and sat in one of the seats was my manager's manager, I believe. And he's an idiot, right? He had no business being on a panel discussion with data folks. And I soon realized very quickly that the other 2 or 3 panelists were also equally unqualified to talk about data. And they were like spitting off the usual kind of buzzwords, big data, this.
Was it like blog post bingo situation?
Honestly, Mårten, it was literally blog post bingo. I'm going to take that. That's a fantastic phrase. And I realized that the rest of the day kind of went like this as well. And I never really blamed myself as the attendee for being there. I never really blamed the speakers for being there. I realized the problem lay with the organizers who did a horrible job matching me as the attendee with the speaker. And that mismatch made it a terrible experience for me. So I decided I was going to start my own event. My philosophy on this is that we don't work in isolation. So why do we attend these all-day events which are dedicated to a single track mindset? And I realized that actually I think there's a lot more to gain when we learn about the challenges of our peers and our colleagues who are in different functions that we collaborate with 40 hours a week. And I really just wanted to build a community around that. And there, there's some baseline rules, no selling, no pitching, anything like that. It's a non-profit for people down in the trenches. It's really about the passion, the story that you want to tell, the innovation that you're doing, or just something fresh and refreshing.
Yeah. But so how do I, if I'm interested in CRAP talks and if I'm hanging out in London, how do I find that?
So the easiest way is to join our meetup group. So if you just search CRAP Talks on meetup.com, I think that's the easiest way. We have the London chapter, which is the main one. There is also a very active Brighton chapter, a dormant Manchester chapter, or just find me on LinkedIn and you'll see me talking about it all the time when an event goes into the diary.
Yeah, I've been to a few CRAP talks and I will definitely say if you're in London, definitely go across to them, or if you're in any of those other areas as well, pick them up too.
We would like to thank you so much for coming here and talking to us. This has been like a really nice conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time.
No, thanks for inviting me. It's been lots of fun.
Our pleasure, Bhav. Thank you so much. What are you nerding out about right now?
I've really engrossed myself into podcasts over the last 9-10 months. When I joined Huel, 3 days a week I'm in the office and I drive to the office, and thankfully when I'm driving there's very little I can do except to listen to music or listen to a podcast. I've completed a 56 episode podcast called How to Think Like an Economist. That was fantastic. I'm about 40 episodes into the Freakonomics podcast. That's fantastic. And the one I'm currently nerding out on is called the You Are Not So Smart podcast, which talks about fallacies of human behavior and, just we make assumptions about life and, who we are as humans, and actually a lot of the studies fly in the face of what our intrinsic beliefs are. So I found that to be super interesting.
Thanks for listening. Want to experiment like Spotify and learn more about confidence? Check out the link in the show notes. Nerd Out at Spotify is produced by Spotify's Sarah Tazari and by Seaplane Armada, who wrote our experimentally proven theme song. I'm Dave Zolotuski. Thanks for nerding out with us.